going to demonstrate for you the game in real time. It's actually live online. I'm also going to send you a live link to the game. So if you want to, you can experiment with it, play with it, and give me some message telling me that, no, it's helpful, you're not liking it, or, well, perhaps it has some sort of interest to it. The game is available online. I'm going to send you a link. You don't have to connect to it right now, but later on, if you're interested, you can have a look. I'm going to demonstrate how it works as it goes. I'm going to send you right now via the texting system, via the chat. I'm going to send you a link. You can play that game on your web browser if you use any of the major recent web browsers, such as Google Chrome, Firefox, Safari, or Microsoft Edge. Of course, some of you might have problems when you try to play it from office or from workplaces, because sometimes workplaces have firewalls that blocks communication. But it works if you try it from home. It's pretty much guaranteed. All right. So this is the NextGen series game. We are going to look at a virtual catchment, a virtual town called Toy Town. It has a population of 300,000 inhabitants. And you're going to try through the game, or I'm going to demonstrate, and we're going to look through it, how to maximize circular economy for water despite problems such as water scarcity. The concept of circular economy we will be looking at is not just about saving water, but it's also about avoiding pollution and reusing materials, saving environmental concern, but also looking at financial aspects of it, because it's circular economy. Therefore, if you do not do anything sensible financially, you will be in trouble. When I close that welcoming windows, I have an overview on the game. So I'm going to go slower now, so to make sure that Tanya can follow. What you are seeing is the virtual town. It is made of different components. On the top right, you've got the main reservoir. It is containing water. It's alimented by rainfall, but also by river flow. And this water is used to supply water demand to the town. So it goes to the drinking water treatment plant, and after it is directed toward the houses. The town is divided in 3 neighborhoods. These are the 3 little houses you can see there. You can change in the game the percentage of houses in each neighborhood. This way you can divide the town in different groups of houses in which you could use different water technology and see the consequences on the overall system. So once the water is used in the houses, it becomes wastewater, and then you see some arrows that point toward this big brown rectangle at the bottom, which is your main wastewater treatment plant. Once the water is treated, it's then directed toward the river downstream. There are many things we monitor throughout the game. So first of all, I'm going to show some of the main indicators which are present on screen. The first one is the reservoir stress. If I click on it, I'm going to minimize that. Let me get rid of this. Okay. if I click on it, you actually have a detailed view explaining what's happening with this reservoir stress indicator. At the moment, I've got a reservoir stress of 90%. What does it mean? The game has a simulation engine that computes for the next 20 years what happens. And when we have a reservoir stress of 90%, that means for the next 20 years, 90% of these years, there will be, the reservoir will be less than half full for at least 10 days. So if I was to do something in the game, such as I go to population and I double my population from 300,000 inhabitants to 600,000 inhabitants, then what happens is you would see that now we are stressed 100% of the time. That means that every single year, the reservoir for more than 10 days is less than half full. The second indicator we're looking at is the water demand met. It is about the percentage of years in which the reservoir is completely empty for more than 10 days. If your reservoir is completely empty for more than 10 days, that means you cannot meet water demand for that particular year. It's a critical year. So this is another indicator. Now, another measure we look at on the side is the environmental flow. It is basically the amount of water left in the river once you've taken away some of the water from the reservoir to supply the town. So you're left with whatever can be going inside the river for your aquatic ecosystem. So if I click on it, it will, it has some explanation. It's basically the percentage of the original river flow retained. The higher, the better. We also have the measure of pollution shown on the side. Pollution midstream because we have the possibility to connect some of the neighborhoods to a decentralized wastewater treatment plant that would release some wastewater or some treated water somewhere midstream. And also downstream, where we have a pollution index as well. So how do we measure pollution? We basically made it up with an index based on the COD, which is the chemical oxygen demand. So what we looked at the number of time there is a release of untreated wastewater. These are called CSO events. And we look at the average chemical oxygen demand during these releases in milligram of oxygen per liter. So what we measure in our little percentage that shows pollution index is the cumulated depth of oxygen. The more you will release nutrients in the water, the more algae will start growing in there, and then the bigger your depth of oxygen will be. So everything is connected. Whatever action you take will have an influence on all this. And it goes further than just, the indicators that shows you. The game of the goal is quite simple. I mean, the goal of the game, is quite simple. It's about maximizing your circular economy score at the top. But what is it made of? If I click on it, these are actually all the components that goes into it. So, for example, this is your water health score. And we have weights at the moment, just for demonstration purpose. You can change the weights of the different sub-measure to get your score to change. So if I click on the plus or the minus, I would change the weight and you see your resulting score changing. So if you give this game to different audiences with different priorities, the game weights for the score can be adjusted for a different audience. So we got the water health score. which is made out of, well, how often do we meet, how often do we satisfy the water demand? We got also the level of stress of the reservoir, and we also have the amount of water reuse we are managing to do in the household. We also have a measure of energy health score, which is about the amount of energy reuse you can do. Notably, if you use anaerobic wastewater treatment, then you can generate biogas, but also the overall energy footprint of the system and the amount of energy you can save by recycling and reusing materials you find in the wastewater. Because, and I'll get to that later, because if you manage, let's say, to recycle or reuse some metals, for example, you do not need to go mine and refine these metals again. Therefore, you are saving exergy, or the amount of energy which would have been needed to mine and refine these metals from scratch. We also, have part of the score, the quantity of materials that are reused, if you can reuse these or not. We also have an environmental health, which is based on the environmental flow, the water quality in the river, and the amount of carbon dioxide or of emission you manage to save. And finally, we have financial components, which is the overall, affordability or the overall cost of whatever is going on in there, and the possible return on investment of two types of technologies, which are the rainwater harvesting and gray water reuse. So this is a brief introduction. Let me show you the game in action. Let's say your town is under pressure. Your population has doubled. So what happens? Then I fixed my population to 600,000 inhabitants. And suddenly you could see that your water demand is only met 30% of the time. Your reservoir is always stressed. It's always less than half full. You have a pretty high pollution level. And this is, a pretty interesting starting point. What can you do? You can see the system is on edge. Water is not infinite. Pollution is there in the background too. So you could, for example, select a neighborhood A, which contain in there 100% of the houses in town, and you can change some of the associated technology, and then you can see what happens. So for example, let's say for every house in this town, I decide to change the shower. I could try one of these different technology, and they all have an associated cost, associated energy expenditure, and they also influence the amount of concentration of wastewater, as well as they can save on the consumption of water. So all that is impacted. So if I select, for example, to just add a fog shower head, one of these fancy shower heads that mix air and water. So if I click on that, then you're going to see what happens to the system. Well, suddenly, instead of meeting only 30% of the water demand, I meet 65% of the water demand. So using the shower head has improved the situation. And if I look at the environmental flow, I'm going to go back to conventional shower. Environmental flow was 50%, so we only had 50% of the normal water river flow. If I put a fog shower, then it's 57%. So the aquatic environment ecosystem is better off. Similarly, if you look at the pollution index at the bottom, is there any consequences? Well, pollution was at 44% because we are using a fog shower. We use less water. So the wastewater that gets out of the house is slightly more concentrated, slightly more polluted if you want. But this is counterbalanced by the fact that we use less water, therefore there is more water left in the river. There's a bigger volume of water in the river. Therefore, whatever is released results in a lesser overall pollution. Now, this is one thing we can do. Perhaps we can select in there what is the best possible toilet. So I don't remember which one is the best toilet technology, but let's say we put a vacuum toilet, which is fairly expensive. So it might make our score go down a bit on the financial side, but that saves water. So if I put a vacuum toilet, I can see we meet now 85% of the water demand, and so on, so on. So we can try different combinations of technologies. We can decide to install a water saving sink, for example, and we can start experimenting as well with different, more modern kind of technology. For example, rainwater harvesting. So if we manage to harvest some of the rainwater in a tank in every house in town, what would happen to the water demand, the reservoir stress, and the pollution? So let's see. I'm going to activate rainwater reuse. Sorry, so I'm activating it again. So it goes from, you now meet 100% of the water demand, and the reservoir stress is only at 75%. So instead of 100%. And if you look down to the right, your pollution index, when you didn't use rainwater reuse, was 43%, and it goes down to 14%. So in a way, rainwater reuse seemed to be a pretty good technology to both minimize pollution in that case and also minimize water stress. But if I look at the detail, I'm going to click on the house and I'm going to a little text explaining what's the energy consumption with the household and also the cost of things. And installing the rainwater harvesting, I've got basically a return of investment period of 20 years. So what does that mean? It means if we invest into rainwater harvesting technology, we can actually get our money back within 20 years, which is extremely good news. Now, what about gray water reuse, another alternative technology? So if I put gray water reuse, I'm going to click on it. And then we notice that it's much better at saving water. We save more water, but as far as we can see, the pollution, instead of being reduced to 13 or 14%, is still around 39%. So gray water reuse seems to be quite good at reducing water stress, but it's not as good at reducing the COD concentration and the pollution problems. And it also has, if I click back on the houses here, it also has a problem, which is the overall return on investment is never going to happen. You're going to get your money back in 1,000 years with the present cost of using gray water reuse. Well, the problem is the operational cost is too high. If you use a filter, which is just a household-based filter, then it's just going to cost you too much. So gray water reuse might work financially if you were to reduce the cost, the operational cost, if you were to group the filtering by neighborhood, for example, centralize it. So if I change my cost per year to, instead of 150 euros to 20 euros, then suddenly the return investment period, instead of being 1,000 years, become 38 years. And if I was to change because of an economy of market, they actually install the installation cost from 4,000 euros to, let's say, 2,000 euros. Then finally, gray water reuse can become practical and interesting from a financial point of view. So we have so far managed to minimize things. I can combine rainwater reuse and gray water reuse. And if you look at the whole picture, then it managed to minimize fantastically well the water stress and the pollution, but at the same time, it will maximize your costs. So it's not 100%, a perfect solution, but mixing these might be a good idea. Another aspect of the problem, I'm going to reset to the standard beginning when we are just 300,000 inhabitants, so the town is not particularly stressed. Another aspect of the problem is you have a cheap way to counter pollution, to minimize the number of untreated discharged of wastewater in the river. And that way is if you connect the houses to a sustainable drainage system. So it's like a basin that can act as a dampener. The problem is when you have lots of rainfall or snow melting, just a wall of water, of untreated water that comes to the wastewater treatment plant at the bottom, well, this cannot be all treated at the same time. So they have to let some of the untreated water go in the river. And that's what results in a CSO event, in an untreated discharge. But if you connect the houses to a sustainable drainage system, which is basically a basin that can absorb some of this rainfall water, then it will, if I click on it, you see it will minimize the pollution at a lower cost than trying to rebuild infrastructures. Of course, you can combine, if you want to be really efficient, you could combine a sustainable drainage system with a technology such as rainwater reuse. And if I click on it, then you're going to see a really good outcome as far as pollution goes. So there are many ways to get around that. I know I have a limited time to explore different questions and possibilities, but I want to show you one more thing in the system. So if I click on material reuse, I'm gonna refresh the system to its standard starting point with the town, which is not super under pressure. And I'm going to click on material reuse. So you can recover nutrients and reuse nutrients from the wastewater treatment plant. And here I have an interface in which you can, not all nutrients are necessarily making you saving money or energy, because some of them are just too cheap, available everywhere. So it's not necessarily cost effective to reuse all nutrients, but for example, potassium and sulfur do have some value. And if you were to reuse, 85% of the potassium and the sulfur you find in the wastewater treatment plant, you could save some money, some energy, or more specifically, because you recover these nutrients, you also don't have to spend energy producing them. And then this is the equivalent of saving carbon, because you do not have to emit the carbon producing these nutrients. But there is another thing which is really interesting, is metals. If I go there, you can see in blue the maximum potential, what would happen in this town of 300,000 inhabitants if you were able to recover all these metals. They are listed here. Okay, aluminium, antimony, arsenic, lead. Some of them are rare metals. Urban centers, they concentrate metal. The powder of metal, or the chunks, they tend to fall with rainwater, with the rainfall, they fall in the drainage pipes. And then they all get to the same place, the wastewater treatment plant. Now, what's interesting is if you were to save, as seen in blue, 85% of all the metals that are listed here that comes to the wastewater treatment plant, this would be the equivalent of, energy-wise, of having 7 wind turbines working all year. That's the equivalent of energy you'd save. And in fact, if you were to convert that to carbon sequestration equivalent, that would be equivalent, if you were to recover these metals, to planting forest, the equivalent of 5% of the surface area of the Netherlands in carbon sink equivalent every year. just by recovering these metals. What is really interesting is we are only looking at domestic wastewater. The concentration in metals of industrial wastewater is at the very least 10 times bigger. In fact, it's between 10 and 10,000 times bigger sometimes. So you could easily imagine that if you were to recover all metals, even in an industrial area, you could probably do the equivalent of, in carbon sink, planting around 50% of the surface area of the Netherlands every year for a town of 300,000 inhabitants, which is quite eye-opening. Note that most of the energy or exergy you could save by recovering metals is not by recovering all the metals. There is only actually 3 or 4 metals that would allow you to recover 90% of that. So you don't need to invent a new technology for recovering every single thing listed there. But if you focus in the game, if you focus on selecting some of these things, for example, if I select aluminum, it should make aluminum already is equivalent, just recycling the aluminum, to planting 1% of the surface area of the Netherlands every year. And if you select, which one in the lists are really the most exergy efficient, you would come up with a list of 3 or 4 metals, which really allows you to make a difference from a carbon emission point of view. I am getting toward the end of the presentation per se, but I want to show you a few more things. There are, if you click on different buttons, for example, there's a list of videos which is available here introducing the games if your link is live. And if you can actually access the game from your office connection. Also, there is the possibility to save your score. So if you click on score, you actually see the list of saved score in a database of other users. Of course, I've just installed the game yesterday evening, so there's not many scores saved. But as it will go, you can, for example, try some ways to optimize the score, put your name in there and submit it, and then it will be present in a leaderboard. There are many more things that I've not shown that you can change in the game. You can play with all sorts of parameters, even, for example, choose how much of your water treatment is combined sewers. There are aspects also about energy. If I click on the energy view here, you'll notice that the amount of energy used by the town for the wastewater treatment only represent around 2% of the energy footprint, while 98% of the energy is spent in the household. So if you really want to save energy in your system, you're better off implementing some sort of household device that saves a little bit of energy, and you'll save on 90% of your energy footprint, 98% of your energy footprint. Because if you save energy just with the water treatment, you'll save, that's great, but you'll save on 2%. So these are, overall consideration that are interesting to consider. Now, this presentation is also supposed to be interactive. So if some of you have some question and want to ask me what to change there, or what would happen if I change something there, I'm totally open to that.
Thank you, Mehdi, because it was the last presentation. I think I'm opening the floor to everybody, and probably we should start with the last one. Also, I have some questions here. Some of them are already answered, but some of them I will read for them. Also, take in consideration that Tanya from interpretation will need to leave in 12 minutes. So if you have questions in English or in Romanian, please do it now. Yeah, let's open the floor. Do you have questions for Mehdi? if I'm from my perspective, I think playing with all these parameters that you are shown us, Mehdi, I think it could be a very valuable lesson. How can we take care more about what we have around us, let's say in house, and I think using different technologies that we have around us and judging them in perspective, I think can save either money, either energy, either water, which is great. It's a good tool, I think, for understanding the circular economy, and this game should be played by everybody. I don't know if it is a good thing to play at the office, because the bosses will fire the people when they will see the screen. But on the other hand, I think it could be also a very good lesson for the bosses. Yeah. Questions? Don't be shy. Mehdi is here, and all the other panelists.
Ciprian, trebuie să-ți aduc aminte că participanții nu pot să pună întrebări în direct, ei doar scriu întrebările în chat.
Yeah. Christina is saying that the participants will not have the access to say aloud the questions, but please write it on the chat.
Cyprian, I see two questions from earlier on that could relate, I think, to my presentation. The first question is, what happens to the sludge from a sewer mining unit? I think, well, it was asked again in other presentations, but as far as I'm concerned,
yes.
Well, there are two things. In the NextGen project, so in this particular case that I presented in Athens, we use the sludge together with bio-waste, in this case prunings from pruning the trees of the city of Athens. These are all accumulated in this particular place, so we use that to produce compost in a rapid process, which produces essentially a soil enhancer. Now, of course, we do that because there is need for soil enhancing for compost in that site, because this is the tree nursery. But in principle, as I said, you would not necessarily want to produce compost at that location. It could be a location, a smaller park downtown, and you don't want to, you don't want to do it, or you don't. You don't have additional waste or whatever. So in that case, in the more generic case, the technology foresees that you pour the sludge. Actually, the sludge, as you know, at this stage is not particularly condensed. It's not a particularly solid. It's a thick liquid, really. You pour that into the sewer. Now the sewer runs all the time. It then conveys the additional solids to wherever it went in the first place, as in the wastewater treatment plant of the city. Actually, as we know, increased organic content for wastewater treatment plants is a good thing. The wastewater treatment plants perform better if the wastewater is less diluted than more diluted, so that's a good thing. But we have to take care of two things. The first is that hydraulic conditions at that sewer, at that specific spot, but also the route between that specific spot and the wastewater treatment plant are such that do not end up with sedimentation, because that would be a problem. Sedimentation is always a problem in sewers, and that would be a problem if you add solids. So this is why we designed this tool. We developed this tool that allows you to quantify the risk and therefore avoid the specific cases that whose route passes through a very low flow route, which might cause problems. In general, there is no problem, but you have to be careful. The second, and I think that is also part of the question, the second question, the quality of the treated wastewater discharge to the public sewer. Of course, we don't discharge treated wastewater in the public sewer. We extract raw sewage, treat it, and use it at the point of demand to irrigate. What we pour back into the sewer is this not in the NextGen case again, but in the more generic case, it's this let's say liquid sludge. I talked about the technical requirement, not to get into sedimentation. There is also a legal requirement. It depends on the system, but in Greece, there is, of course, for good reason, a threshold of BOD content that a wastewater stream can have to be accepted into a sewer in the first place. And this is because the legislation foresees, wants to stop, let's say, industry pouring untreated wastewater into the sewer, and then of course that would create shocks for the wastewater treatment plants. So there is a legislative barrier there, but what we've done is because this is essentially a it's a regulation of the wastewater company, and because we created this, we developed this technology together with the the water company of Athens, which also the wastewater provider. We redrafted this regulation to specifically describe and exempt sewer mining units of a particular type. Again, because the regulation actually, this is a very interesting point, because quite often regulations exist for different purposes, and we bump into them when we want to implement circular economy solutions, which have a different perspective of what a waste is. And therefore, we need to work together with institutions, both utilities, but also regulators, to create the exceptions, the pathways through which circular economy can happen, in this legislative framework. So that's my feedback.
Thank you, Christos. But also, I think the same question is going to the Romanian case, because came from Csaba Bauer, which is the representative of one water utility in central Romania. So the question is also going to Nicoleta and Johan. And the question is, what about the quality of treated water discharged in the public sewer?
Want to have a try, Nicoleta?
Ok. Apa, pot să vorbesc în român acum? Apa descărcată în canalizare se încadrează în INTPA 002, o legislație românească pentru apă. Dacă întrebați de apa care se evacuează acum, efluentul care va ieși după folosirea pilotului, Johan poate să spună mai multe despre acesta. Dar deocamdată e o stație de epurare obișnuită și se încadrează în NTPA 002 pentru cei care sunt din România, presupun că știu ce înseamnă asta.
Yeah, just to add to what Nicoleta said, so currently the wastewater is partially treated, so it's nowhere near good quality for any sort of reuse. So the COD that is being discharged into the sewer and the COD of the partially treated water, we're talking in the order of 900 to even 1500 milligram per liter of COD, with an intake of 3,000, 2,000, 3,000. So there is need for further treatment, and that's what Aquaspice will be doing, to treat it to a quality good enough for reuse in the factory.
Thank you. Another question is, I think, going to Mehdy. How the industrial water consumption is influencing the game? I see only domestic household parameters included.
Yeah, it's basically a good question. No industrial consumption. It's all domestic. We based our paper. I looked at all the literature on the concentration of metals and everything you could find in domestic stuff. Because NextGen is focused on the domestic aspect of, as far as I was told. So, but of course, as mentioned in the game, if you add industrial wastewater, the amount of exergy you can save by recycling metals is at least an order of magnitude higher.
Thank you. I'm forced to go to closing here because we are already 2 minutes before 4 o'clock our time. which is 3 o'clock your time. I would like to say a big thank you to everybody, both the speakers and the audience, because I think it was an interesting exchange of knowledge from taking from the projects that are under development now, but also older projects. And let's hope for the future and future cooperation in circular water developments between your organizations. So we had something like 60 people in audience today. I don't know from all of them their organization, but for sure this kind of final information will be shared with you all, including the presentations, and all these webinars have been transmitted live on the Facebook, on the Aquademica Facebook page. Once again, thank you all. Don't forget that we will send you in Romanian and in English language a kind of evaluation, monitoring and evaluation format. It will be on email probably, and we hope to hear from you. How was this webinar, and how can I, like together with my colleagues Florentina and Ioana in BDG, how can we help you in transferring more knowledge in circular economy and in water sector in general, including energy consumption, agriculture, irrigation. Let's do that in the next years, and I hope we will be very successful on the Danube, not only Romania, but also, as I said, Bulgaria, Moldova, maybe South Ukraine, Serbia, Hungary are invited to this hub. Let's see how can we improve our knowledge because we have to learn one from each other. Thank you very much all, and have a nice evening from now on, and see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.